The first thing they teach you in cardiac nursing school is how to recognize death. Fixed pupils. No pulse. No electrical activity on the monitor. Body temperature dropping. It's supposed to be straightforward, clinical, absolute. On October 15th, 2023, at 6:27 in the morning, I learned that everything I thought I knew about death was wrong. My name is Karen Dalton, and I spent 16 years as a cardiac ICU nurse at Cleveland Heart Institute in Ohio. I've pronounced more patients dead than I care to count. I've held the hands of families as they said goodbye. I've disconnected life support, covered bodies with sheets, and called morgues to arrange transport. But on that October morning, everything I thought I knew about the finality of death was challenged in an unexplained way. This is the story that ended my career in cardiac care, and I'm still trying to understand what I witnessed that night. Cleveland Heart Institute is a premier cardiac care facility serving northeastern Ohio and parts of Pennsylvania. It's a comprehensive medical center with a 40-bed cardiac intensive care unit that handles some of the most complex cardiovascular cases in the region. During my time there, I cared for thousands of patients, from routine post-operative recoveries to the most critical cardiogenic emergencies, where minutes meant the difference between life and death. The case I'm about to tell you about began on October 14th, 2023, during what should have been a routine Saturday evening shift. I had arrived at work at 7 p.m. for the night shift, which typically ran until 7 a.m. the following morning. October evenings in Cleveland are usually quiet in the cardiac ICU. The summer heat that sometimes triggers cardiac events has passed, and the winter holiday stress that floods our unit with heart attacks is still months away. The patient was Arthur Kellerman, a 67-year-old retired mechanical engineer who had been admitted 3 days earlier for what appeared to be a routine aneurysm repair. Arthur had been discovered to have a 5.2-centimeter abdominal aortic aneurysm during a routine CT scan for kidney stones. While not immediately life-threatening, his vascular surgeon, Dr. David Cromwell, had recommended elective surgical repair due to the size and Arthur's overall good health status. The surgery itself had gone exceptionally well. Dr. Cromwell had performed an endovascular aneurysm repair, a minimally invasive procedure where a synthetic graft is inserted through small incisions in the groin to reinforce the weakened arterial wall. Arthur had tolerated the procedure beautifully, with stable vital signs throughout the 2-hour operation and an unremarkable recovery in the immediate post-operative period. What made Arthur's case particularly routine was his excellent baseline health. Despite his age, he had no history of coronary artery disease, diabetes, or significant hypertension. He was a non-smoker who maintained an active lifestyle, walking 3 miles daily and working part-time as a consulting engineer. His pre-operative cardiac evaluation had shown normal left ventricular function with an ejection fraction of 60%, normal stress test results, and clean coronary arteries on cardiac catheterization. By Saturday evening, Arthur was scheduled to be discharged the following Monday morning. His post-operative course had been textbook perfect. His incision sites were healing well, his blood pressure was stable, and his kidney function remained normal despite the contrast dye used during the procedure. He had been walking the halls of the cardiac ICU with physical therapy, eating regular meals, and expressing eagerness to return home to his wife Eleanor and their 2 adult children. I had been Arthur's primary nurse for the previous 2 nights, and we had developed the kind of easy rapport that sometimes forms between patients and nurses during longer stays. Arthur was intelligent and curious about his medical care, asking thoughtful questions about his recovery and the monitoring equipment surrounding his bed. He was also a natural storyteller, regaling me with tales from his 40-year engineering career, including his work designing components for NASA's Space Shuttle program in the 1980s. "Nurse Dalton," he had said to me on Friday evening, "I have to tell you, this place runs like a well-oiled machine. You folks have this cardiac care thing figured out better than we ever designed those shuttle systems." His comment had made me smile because Arthur was the kind of patient who reminded me why I had chosen cardiac nursing in the first place. At approximately 11:30 p.m. on Saturday, October 14th, I was conducting my routine midnight assessment rounds when Arthur's cardiac monitor began displaying irregular rhythms. I was standing at the nurse's station reviewing lab results for another patient when I heard the distinctive sound of premature ventricular contractions on Arthur's telemetry monitor. I immediately went to his bedside to find Arthur awake and alert, but complaining of mild chest discomfort and a fluttering sensation in his chest. His vital signs showed a heart rate of 88 beats per minute with frequent PVCs, blood pressure of 135/82, and oxygen saturation of 96% on room air. While concerning, these findings were not immediately alarming in a post-operative cardiac patient. "I'm feeling a bit off, Nurse Dalton," Arthur said, pressing his hand to his chest. "Like my heart is skipping beats. It started about 20 minutes ago." I explained that some irregular heartbeats were not uncommon after major surgery, especially vascular procedures that could affect fluid balance and electrolyte levels. I obtained a 12-lead electrocardiogram, which showed frequent premature ventricular contractions, but no signs of acute coronary syndrome or other immediately dangerous arrhythmias. I contacted Dr. Cromwell, who was taking call for the vascular surgery service, and Dr. Amanda Sinclair, the cardiology attending covering the cardiac ICU that evening. Both physicians came to evaluate Arthur within 30 minutes of my call. Dr. Sinclair ordered additional blood work to check his electrolyte levels, particularly potassium and magnesium, as deficiencies in these minerals commonly cause cardiac irritability in post-operative patients. The blood work results, available by 1:15 a.m., showed mild hypokalemia with a potassium level of 3.2 milliequivalents per liter and slightly low magnesium at 1.4 milligrams per deciliter. Dr. Sinclair prescribed intravenous potassium and magnesium replacement, which I began administering immediately through Arthur's central venous catheter. "This should settle things down," Dr. Sinclair assured Arthur. "We see this all the time after major surgery. Your body just needs a little fine-tuning, and you'll be back to normal." For the next 2 hours, Arthur's condition appeared to stabilize. The frequency of his premature ventricular contractions decreased from every third beat to occasional isolated PVCs. His chest discomfort resolved, and he was able to rest comfortably. I rechecked his vital signs every 15 minutes and continued monitoring his cardiac rhythm closely. At 3:45 a.m., Arthur's condition changed dramatically and without warning. I was charting his vital signs at the nurse's station when his cardiac monitor alarm sounded. Looking at the telemetry display, I saw that Arthur had developed ventricular tachycardia, a rapid and potentially life-threatening heart rhythm. I ran to his bedside to find Arthur conscious but clearly distressed. His heart rate had increased to 180 beats per minute, and his blood pressure had dropped to 85/45. He was pale, diaphoretic, and complaining of severe chest pain and shortness of breath. "I can't catch my breath," Arthur gasped. "Something's wrong. Something's really wrong." I immediately called for Dr. Sinclair and initiated our rapid response protocols. Within minutes, our cardiac ICU team had assembled. Dr. Sinclair, Dr. Cromwell, respiratory therapist Jake Morrison, and 2 additional nurses. Arthur's ventricular tachycardia was causing hemodynamic compromise, meaning his heart was beating so rapidly that it couldn't fill properly between beats, reducing the amount of blood being pumped to his organs. Dr. Sinclair made the decision to perform synchronized cardioversion, a procedure where a controlled electrical shock is delivered to the heart to restore normal rhythm. Arthur was conscious and alert, so he received sedation before the procedure. The first shock at 100 joules successfully converted his rhythm back to normal sinus rhythm, and his blood pressure improved to 115/70. "There we go," Dr. Sinclair said with relief. "That should take care of it. We'll start you on some medication to prevent this from happening again." Arthur was started on an intravenous amiodarone drip, a powerful anti-arrhythmic medication commonly used to prevent recurrent ventricular tachycardia. His electrolyte replacement was continued, and we increased the frequency of his cardiac monitoring. For the next hour, Arthur remained stable with normal sinus rhythm and improved vital signs. At 5:20 a.m., Arthur experienced his second episode of ventricular tachycardia. This time, the rhythm was faster and more unstable, with a heart rate of 220 beats per minute and almost undetectable blood pressure. Arthur lost consciousness within seconds of the rhythm change. I called a code blue immediately while beginning chest compressions. Our cardiac arrest team responded within 2 minutes, and we initiated advanced cardiac life support protocols. Dr. Sinclair attempted electrical cardioversion again, but this time the shock did not restore normal rhythm. Arthur remained in ventricular tachycardia despite multiple shocks at increasing energy levels. We began cardiopulmonary resuscitation with high-quality chest compressions, advanced airway management, and intravenous medications, including epinephrine, amiodarone, and lidocaine. Despite our aggressive interventions, Arthur's rhythm deteriorated to ventricular fibrillation, an even more chaotic and fatal rhythm. Over the next 45 minutes, our team provided continuous CPR while attempting every available intervention. We delivered a total of 8 electrical shocks, administered 6 rounds of epinephrine, multiple doses of antiarrhythmic medications, and even tried experimental treatments, including intravenous magnesium sulfate and sodium bicarbonate. Arthur's rhythm occasionally organized into brief periods of ventricular tachycardia, but immediately degenerated back to ventricular fibrillation or asystole. At 6:05 a.m., after 45 minutes of continuous resuscitation efforts, Arthur's cardiac rhythm transitioned to a systole, a flat line indicating no electrical activity in the heart. We continued CPR for an additional 10 minutes, but there was no response to our interventions. Arthur showed no signs of life, no pulse, no blood pressure, no spontaneous respirations, and fixed and dilated pupils. Dr. Sinclair made the difficult decision to terminate resuscitation efforts at 6:15 a.m. In accordance with standard protocols, she checked for any signs of circulation or neurological response one final time. Arthur had no pulse, no blood pressure, and no pupillary responses to light. His body temperature had begun to drop, and rigor mortis was beginning to set in. Time of death, 6:15 a.m., October 15th, 2023, Dr. Sinclair announced to the code team. The emotional weight of losing Arthur was particularly heavy for me. Over the 3 days I had cared for him, he had become more than just a patient. He had shared stories about his grandchildren, his engineering projects, and his plans for retirement travel with his wife. Just hours earlier, we had been discussing his discharge plans and his excitement about returning home. According to our standard post-mortem procedures, I began the process of preparing Arthur's body and notifying his family. I removed the cardiac monitoring leads, disconnected the intravenous lines, and covered his body with a clean sheet. I called Eleanor to inform her of Arthur's unexpected death and to arrange for her to come to the hospital. At 6:27 a.m., 12 minutes after Arthur had been officially pronounced dead, something happened that completely defied every principle of medicine and biology I had learned during my 16-year nursing career. I was standing at the nurse's station completing the required documentation for Arthur's death when I heard a sound that made my blood run cold, the distinctive beeping of a cardiac monitor showing organized heart rhythm. I looked up at the central monitoring station, which still displayed Arthur's room number and telemetry signal, and saw unmistakable evidence of a normal sinus rhythm with a heart rate of 72 beats per minute. My first thought was that there had been some kind of technical malfunction with the monitoring equipment. I had removed Arthur's cardiac leads myself, and his body was lying motionless under a sheet in his bed. But the monitor clearly showed organized electrical activity consistent with a functioning heart. I walked quickly to Arthur's room, expecting to find that the monitoring leads had somehow become reconnected or that another patient's signal was being displayed incorrectly. What I found instead challenged everything I understood about life and death. Arthur was lying exactly as I had left him, covered with a white sheet, with his arms positioned at his sides. But his chest was rising and falling with slow, regular respirations. I pulled back the sheet and placed my fingers on his neck to check for a pulse. To my absolute shock, I felt a strong, regular pulse at a rate consistent with what was being displayed on the cardiac monitor. This is impossible, I whispered to myself, staring down at Arthur's peaceful face. I called out for Dr. Sinclair, who was still in the unit, completing her own post-code documentation. She arrived at Arthur's bedside within 30 seconds, and I could see the confusion and disbelief in her expression as she observed the same things I was witnessing. "Karen, help me understand what I'm seeing here," Dr. Sinclair said, her voice tight with controlled confusion. "Did we miss something? Did he actually still have vital signs when we called the code?" I explained that I had personally verified Arthur's death according to standard protocols. I had checked for pulse, blood pressure, and pupillary responses multiple times. His body had been cooling and showing early signs of rigor mortis. There had been no question that Arthur had died. Dr. Sinclair performed her own assessment of Arthur's current condition. His heart rate was 72 beats per minute with normal sinus rhythm. His blood pressure was 110/65. His oxygen saturation was 94% on room air. His pupils were equal and reactive to light. Most remarkably, his body temperature was normal at 98.2 degrees Fahrenheit, showing no signs of the post-mortem cooling that had been occurring just minutes earlier. "Arthur," Dr. Sinclair said, gently shaking his shoulder. "Arthur, can you hear me?" Arthur's eyes opened slowly, and he looked around the room with a confused but alert expression. "Dr. Sinclair? Nurse Dalton? What happened? I feel like I've been asleep for a very long time." I stood frozen at Arthur's bedside, unable to process what I was witnessing. 12 minutes earlier, this man had been dead. Not unconscious, not in a coma, not in some deep medical condition that mimics death. He had been dead by every clinical definition I knew, and now he was awake, alert, and apparently completely normal. "Arthur, you experienced some serious heart rhythm problems," Dr. Sinclair explained, her professional composure barely concealing her bewilderment. "We had to perform CPR and try to restart your heart. How are you feeling right now?" "I feel fine," Arthur replied, sitting up slightly in bed. "Actually, I feel better than I have in days. The chest pain is completely gone, and I'm not short of breath anymore. What time is it? How long was I unconscious?" Dr. Sinclair and I exchanged glances. How do you explain to a patient that he had been dead for 12 minutes and had spontaneously returned to life? How do you document something that shouldn't be medically possible? "Arthur, we need to run some tests to make sure you're stable," Dr. Sinclair said. "I'm going to order some blood work and another electrocardiogram. Try to rest while we figure out what happened." Over the next several hours, we subjected Arthur to the most comprehensive medical evaluation of his life. Blood tests, electrocardiograms, echocardiograms, chest x-rays, CT scans, and neurological assessments. Every single test result was not only normal, but actually improved from his pre-arrest values. His cardiac enzymes showed no evidence of heart damage from the prolonged cardiac arrest. His brain function was completely intact with no signs of hypoxic injury, despite having no circulation for 45 minutes during CPR and an additional 12 minutes after being pronounced dead. Most inexplicably, Arthur's underlying heart rhythm abnormalities had completely resolved. The premature ventricular contractions that had started his decline were gone. His electrolyte levels were perfectly normal. The echocardiogram showed normal heart function, with no signs of the cardiac stunning that typically occurs after prolonged CPR. "It's like his heart reset itself," Dr. Sinclair confided to me during a brief break from Arthur's evaluation. "I've never seen anything like this in 20 years of cardiology. Medically speaking, what we witnessed should be impossible." Word of Arthur's case spread quickly through Cleveland Heart Institute. By afternoon, our cardiac ICU had been visited by the hospital's chief of cardiology, the director of cardiac electrophysiology, and even the chief medical officer. Each specialist examined Arthur and reviewed his medical records, and each one left shaking their head in bewilderment. Dr. Harrison Blackwell, our chief of cardiology, spent nearly 2 hours with Arthur, reviewing every detail of his case. "In 30 years of cardiology, I've seen patients survive against incredible odds," he told me. but I've never seen a patient return to life after being clinically dead. This challenges fundamental assumptions about cardiac arrest and resuscitation. Arthur himself seemed remarkably untroubled by the medical mystery surrounding his case. When I asked him about his experience during the time he was unconscious, he described something that gave me chills. "I remember the chest pain and the breathing problems," Arthur told me. "Then everything went dark, but not like falling asleep. It was different. I felt like I was floating above my bed, watching all of you working on my body. I could see you doing chest compressions, and I could see Dr. Sinclair using those electrical paddles. I wanted to tell you that I was okay, that you didn't need to keep trying so hard, but I couldn't communicate." "What happened next?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "I saw you cover my body with a sheet, and I watched you call my wife to tell her I had died. I felt terrible for Eleanor, knowing she would be devastated. But then I saw something strange. There was a bright light, but not like a light bulb or the sun. It was warm and peaceful, and I felt drawn toward it." Arthur paused, as if deciding whether to continue his story. I started moving toward the light, but then I heard something that stopped me. It was Eleanor's voice, even though she wasn't here yet. She was crying and saying my name, telling me not to leave her. The sound of her voice pulled me back, and the next thing I knew, I was waking up in this bed. I had heard similar near-death experience accounts from other patients over the years, but Arthur's description was different. The timing of his account suggested that he had been conscious and observing during the period when he was clinically dead, including the time after we had stopped resuscitation efforts. Arthur remained in our cardiac ICU for an additional 4 days while we tried to understand what had happened to him. During that time, his recovery was nothing short of remarkable. His surgical incisions healed perfectly. His heart rhythm remained normal without any medications. His energy level and cognitive function were completely normal. Multiple specialists consulted on Arthur's case, including cardiac electrophysiologists, neurologists, and even researchers from Case Western Reserve University, who were studying cardiac arrest and resuscitation. None of them could provide a medical explanation for what we had witnessed. On October 19th, 5 days after his unexplained return to life, Arthur was discharged home in perfect health. His final electrocardiogram was completely normal. His blood work was perfect. His echocardiogram showed better heart function than his preoperative studies. "Nurse Dalton," Arthur said to me as he was preparing to leave, "I want you to know that whatever happened to me, I'm grateful that you were there. I think you and Dr. Sinclair were part of bringing me back, even if the medical books can't explain how." I walked Arthur to the hospital entrance where Eleanor was waiting with their car. Watching them embrace and drive away, I felt a profound sense of confusion and unease that I couldn't shake. I had witnessed something that challenged the very foundations of medical science and my understanding of life and death. In the weeks and months following Arthur's case, I found myself unable to focus on my work the way I had before. Every time I cared for a patient in cardiac arrest, I wondered if the same thing might happen again. Every time we called a time of death, I found myself waiting and watching for signs of impossible resuscitation. I began researching medical literature for similar cases and discovered that Arthur's experience, while extremely rare, was not unique. The phenomenon is known in medical circles as the Lazarus syndrome or auto-resuscitation, the spontaneous return of circulation after resuscitation efforts have been terminated. There have been fewer than 100 documented cases in medical literature, and most patients who experience it do not survive for long periods. What made Arthur's case particularly unusual was the length of time he had been clinically dead, the completeness of his recovery, and the absence of any neurological damage despite prolonged lack of circulation to his brain. In most reported cases of Lazarus syndrome, patients either die again within hours or suffer significant brain damage from oxygen deprivation. 6 months after Arthur's discharge, I contacted him to see how he was doing. He reported that he was in excellent health and had returned to all of his normal activities. He had undergone extensive cardiac testing with his private cardiologist and all results continued to be completely normal. Most remarkably, he had no memory loss or cognitive deficits from his experience. "I feel like I've been given a second chance at life," Arthur told me during our phone conversation. "Eleanor and I have started traveling more, spending more time with our grandchildren. Whatever happened to me in that hospital room, it made me realize how precious every day is." Arthur's case fundamentally changed how I approached cardiac nursing and patient care. I became much more cautious about declaring patients dead, even when all clinical signs pointed to death. I started paying closer attention to subtle signs of life that might be missed during standard assessments. I also became deeply involved in research into cardiac arrest and resuscitation, trying to understand the mechanisms that might explain cases like Arthur's. But more than changing my medical practice, Arthur's case affected me on a personal and philosophical level in ways that I struggled to process. If Arthur had been conscious and aware during the time he was clinically dead, what did that mean about the nature of consciousness and death? If he could return to life after 12 minutes of being dead, how many other patients might be experiencing awareness during their final moments? The thought of patients being conscious and trapped during what we consider clinical death was almost too disturbing to contemplate. I began questioning every pronouncement of death I had witnessed during my career, wondering if those patients had been aware of our conversations about their condition, about end-of-life decisions, about organ donation. I started experiencing anxiety attacks during cardiac arrest situations. When performing CPR, I found myself wondering whether the patient was somehow aware of our efforts, whether they could hear our discussions about their prognosis, whether they were experiencing fear or pain during the resuscitation attempts. 9 months after Arthur's case, I was caring for a 74-year-old woman who had experienced a massive heart attack. After 40 minutes of unsuccessful CPR, the attending physician made the decision to terminate resuscitation efforts. As I was preparing the patient's body for the family, I found myself unable to stop watching for signs of life, waiting for some miracle similar to what had happened with Arthur. The patient remained dead, but the experience made me realize that I could no longer function effectively as a cardiac ICU nurse. Arthur's case had created a level of uncertainty and anxiety that made it impossible for me to provide the confident, decisive care that cardiac patients require. I submitted my resignation from Cleveland Heart Institute 3 weeks later. In my resignation letter, I wrote that I was leaving to pursue other opportunities in healthcare. But the truth was that Arthur's case had fundamentally altered my understanding of life, death, and consciousness in ways that made cardiac critical care impossible for me to continue. I moved to a position in outpatient cardiology where I could provide patient care without the complex questions about life and death that had made cardiac ICU nursing impossible for me. I deliberately avoided any roles that involved critical care or cardiac arrest situations. Arthur continued to do well, and I received occasional updates about his condition through mutual contacts at the hospital. 2 years after his inexplicable resuscitation, he remained in perfect health with no recurrence of cardiac problems. He had become something of a local celebrity, speaking at medical conferences about his experience and participating in research studies about near-death experiences and consciousness. The case of Arthur Kellerman remains one of the most well-documented and thoroughly studied examples of the Lazarus syndrome in recent medical literature. It continues to be cited in research papers, discussed at cardiology conferences, and referenced in debates about consciousness, death determination, and the ethical implications of resuscitation efforts. But for me, Arthur's case represents something more than a medical anomaly or research curiosity. It serves as a profound reminder of the limitations of medical knowledge and the mysteries that still surround human consciousness and the boundary between life and death. The most important lesson from Arthur's case may not be medical or scientific, but deeply human. It reminds us that death may not be the absolute boundary we believe it to be, and that consciousness might persist in ways that our current medical understanding cannot detect or measure. Arthur's 12 minutes of impossible life gave his family the gift of many additional years together, but it also raised questions that continue to challenge fundamental assumptions about medicine, consciousness, and what it means to be truly alive or dead. For the medical community, Arthur's case serves as a compelling argument for approaching all cardiac arrest patients with humility about the boundaries between life and death. It reminds us that our current methods for determining death may be incomplete, and that patients who appear to be beyond help may still have possibilities for recovery that we don't understand. The case of Arthur Kellerman will always remain for me the most unexplained and humbling experience of my nursing career. It taught me that medicine, for all its advances and sophistication, still contains profound mysteries that challenge our most basic assumptions about life, consciousness, and what it means to exist. Arthur shouldn't have come back to life. According to everything we know about cardiac arrest, prolonged CPR, and the medical determination of death, his resuscitation was impossible. The length of time he had been clinically dead, the absence of any circulation to his brain, and the completeness of his subsequent recovery should have precluded any possibility of survival. But he did come back to life. For 12 minutes, Arthur Kellerman was dead by every clinical definition we had, and then he was alive again. Not just alive, but completely recovered and neurologically intact. The most haunting aspect of Arthur's case is not the medical impossibility of what occurred, but what it suggests about the nature of consciousness and death. If Arthur was truly aware and observing during his period of clinical death, it raises fundamental questions about what happens to human consciousness when we die, and whether death is as final as we have always believed. Arthur's impossible resuscitation reminds us that the boundary between life and death may be far more complex and mysterious than we currently understand, and that consciousness might transcend physical limitations in ways that medicine has yet to acknowledge or explain. I sleep better now in my outpatient cardiology position, caring for patients who don't require the complex life and death decisions that defined my cardiac ICU career. But I still think about Arthur every day, and I wonder about the dozens of cardiac arrests that occur in hospitals around the world each day, and whether they involve aspects of consciousness and awareness that remain completely unrecognized by medical teams. The impossible resuscitation I witnessed that October morning still haunts me. Not because of what it meant for Arthur's specific case, but because of what it suggested about the nature of human consciousness and the possibility that death might not be the absolute ending we have always believed it to be.